Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2019 horror superhero film, Brightburn. Now, Brightburn is one of those films where it just doesn't shine as brightly as it could. And that's incredibly disappointing and frustrating because we are at a point with films where we are starving for new content. We are starving for somewhat unique concepts and ideas. And when you have something like this that has a potentially fresh take on something, and it just turns out to be so mediocre and so meh, that's just incredibly aggravating because that leads to this idea being wasted because you're not going to get more from this concept. You're not going to get another film in this series because it didn't do that well with critics and it didn't really do that well with audiences. So it's one of those things where it just feels like a giant missed opportunity. Now, the film is directed by David Yarovesky, and this is a guy who did a lot of short films prior to this movie. I think this was his theatrical feature debut. I could be wrong. Uh, if it's not his debut, it's definitely one of the first few films that he did. And you can definitely kind of tell that because there are some moments where the direction is just a little flat. It doesn't soar as high as it potentially could have with a better director or more established director. There are some scenes where it definitely does show its budget, but then there's some other sequences that are effectively creepy or chilling or eerie or have a certain sense of thrill to them. But there's a lot of stuff in it that just feels very stock, very standard in terms of the direction. I think it's probably because of the fact that the director just didn't really have a lot of experience. He's just kind of just going through the motions. Not necessarily going through the motions because that's a little bit harsh, but he was just trying to figure things out on the fly. And that definitely did show at times because there are moments where you could kind of not really tell the difference between the level of direction in this and something that you would see on the CW. So the direction wasn't a net negative. It wasn't really one of the main things that made the film so mediocre. But it was something that definitely could have been improved upon and probably would have made the film a little bit better if you had a more established, more veteran director doing this film. Like, for instance, if James Gunn just did this movie. Like, this film would have been immensely better if James Gunn directed it because he has a certain style, a certain energy, and a certain talent that a lot of other directors don't really have. And this guy just didn't really have that extra boost that you get from a more established director like James Gunn. The script by Brian Gunn and Mark Gunn, it's another one of those instances where you have a Gunn involved, but it would have been better if James Gunn was involved with the script as well. The screenplay is easily the most frustrating thing about the movie. You have a great setup. It starts off really strong with this mysterious opening about this couple who are trying to conceive, and then some kind of spacecraft crashes on their farm, and then it starts showing you footage of this kid that they have been blessed with, and the kid then starts to show signs of being more than just a regular human. He starts to show signs of being able to handle a lot of extreme instances of pain, or he shows showcases of strength that are superhuman. And it's a good start. It builds up rather well. But then it just misses the mark when it comes to a lot of other things about it. For instance, it takes way too long for the parents to really get the hint that he's not going to be the hero that you want him to be, and you need to get ready and get prepared because he's actually a threat to humanity. He's not humanity's savior, and you need to do something about this shit sooner rather than later. It takes them way too long to pick up on the signs when it comes to him changing in terms of his behavior and his mindset, and when it comes to him becoming more and more violent. And then on top of that, the character of Brightburn, the kid himself, Brandon, the way that this character is written, he's not very likable. He's not very relatable. He's so distant. He's so alien from the very beginning that there really isn't much of a transition when it comes to this character. It doesn't seem like it's that much of a stretch that he would go from this relative social outcast to this humanity-hating supervillain. Like, it doesn't really seem like it's that much of a contrast. It seems like they copied elements of a supervillain arc in terms of an origin story and threw in Superman's origin in terms of Brandon being a superhuman alien that was sent to Earth, and just combine things together in some weird pastiche. Like, it just doesn't really work, especially when they're trying to make you more empathetic. They're trying to make you sympathize with Brandon and what's going on, and sympathize with his family and his friends, and he barely has any friends. There's that one girl that he had a crush on, but then the script does a bad job with that whole dynamic, because you never really see moments where he shows affection towards her in a real and genuine human way. So there's no reason to really grieve over the loss of his humanity. And that's a huge problem with this script. I think it was a huge mistake not to flesh out his humanity more, because then it would make things genuinely more tragic and compelling to have this kid in Brandon Breyer, who's like your average normal kid. He's got friends. He's got a good relationship with his parents. He's not super antisocial. But then something happens and his mindset starts to shift. Maybe he actually gets the courage to ask the girl out on a date or something like that, and it doesn't go well, and something happens and he accidentally hurts her, and then she hates him for it, and then his friends ostracize him for that, and then on top of that he learns his true identity. He learns what actually is going on with him. So he learns that his parents have been lying to him this whole time. And that's what causes him to not trust humanity. That's what causes him to succumb to all these messages that he's hearing from the spaceship. That's what makes him become evil, is that he sees the darker parts of humanity. He sees how people lie and how quickly other humans can turn on other humans. And then he decides he's going to eradicate humanity and wipe the slate clean so he can save humanity. Like, maybe he has this demented idea that he'll be with this girl and they'll create a new race or something like that. A new, more superior, more powerful, more kind, more nice and respectful and appreciative and just a genuinely better bit of mankind, but all encapsulated into this one new race that he would be the progenitor of. Like, you could see something like that happening with this character, but they didn't really do anything with the character in that regard. They didn't go in that direction. They took the lazy route as screenwriters, and as a result, the film really suffers from that. The horror elements, though, I think are really effective. I think the film is genuinely spooky and gets under your skin when it needs to. There are some really grisly death scenes in this that really surprised me. I mean, there's that one sequence with the mother of the love interest for Brandon, who gets glass in her eye, and that was pretty intense. Then there's that whole scene where he lifts up his uncle in his truck and slams the truck down onto the asphalt, and the force of the slam causes his uncle's head to smack into the steering wheel, and the force is so strong that it splits open his mouth and like the whole bottom half of his face. And just the idea of a super fast, superhuman, sociopathic killer is pretty terrifying. That's like the ultimate slasher villain. Because there isn't really much of a weakness other than he can potentially be harmed by his own spacecraft, the spacecraft that he arrived to Earth in, and that leads to another aspect of the script that I didn't like, and it just ties into something I mentioned earlier. These parents take too long to pick up on things. Why the hell did his mom not already have a piece of the spaceship ready to go and weaponized for the inevitable moment when Brandon becomes hard to control and becomes a threat? She doesn't figure it out until it's way too fucking late. And then on top of that, she essentially sends her husband out to die. She knows what he's going to do. She knows that he's going to take her son to the woods and they're going to have some father-son time and he's going to try to kill him. And she knows that the bullets aren't going to do shit, but she doesn't tell him that. But at the same time, he doesn't figure it out either. So they're both pretty dumb and pretty daft and pretty just narrow-minded or stubborn or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I understand why initially there's trepidation when it comes to these parents, when it comes to realizing that their son is not who they think he is and that he's a threat to humanity and they need to do something about it and they might have to kill him. I understand why initially they're like, no, that's not possible. There's good in him. I know it. But at a certain point, it just becomes really implausible that you would continue to focus on that when there are all these signs that are right in front of your face that's not really the case anymore. Like, he's more evil than he is good. So you need to take this kid out. And I understand why they didn't succeed, because it's a setup for a potential franchise. But I just feel the way that things were written, the way that things were handled with that whole thing was terrible, and that definitely could have been improved upon. And like I said, just having Brandon being a more likable character from the very beginning, that would have improved the screenplay and the effectiveness of the story as well. Also, it's one of those films too where the aftermath is more interesting than the movie itself, because this is all a setup for sequels that never happened. It's the origin story. It's the origin story of this new supervillain who has a superhero arc, and the scenes where he's just wreaking havoc and just being a absolute menace, and people dealing with the fallout of that, and then the implications of it, and the idea that there might be others like him. That's just more interesting. That's more compelling, that's more captivating than the origin story, which is a pretty generic family drama that it was not written very well, mixed with a horror film. The horror film part of the script is effective, but the family drama aspect, not so much. It really needed to either be a more effective family drama or just be a straight up horror film. I don't think the mix of the two works because the juxtaposition is just uneven because of the strength of certain parts of the script. The cast, though, is a definite standout. I would say the cast is one of the biggest strengths of the film. Elizabeth Banks, yes, the character was annoying and frustrating because of how stupid she was at times and how stubborn she was and how she would refuse to realize the reality of the situation, but her performance was good. It was not a bad performance at all by Elizabeth Banks. I thought she did an excellent job. You bought that she was really compassionate and loving towards Brandon. She had a certain bit of charisma herself. You bought that Brandon trusted her. David Denman, who played the father, he also did a decent job. Although, to be honest, he just reminded me of like a older, chubbier version of the actor who played the Red Ranger in Power Rangers. I'm trying to remember what the actor's name is. I think it's... Yeah, Austin St. John. That's who it is. Austin St. John. Yeah, he did. He reminded me of an older, fatter Austin St. John with a beard. But he was fine. He did a decent enough job as the dad. I'm not going to say that his performance was an issue because he had good chemistry with Elizabeth Banks. He bought that the two were husband and wife. And I bought the bond that he had with his kid as well. Jackson A. Dunn as Brandon Breyer, I also thought his performance was good, especially when it comes to him being more of a sociopathic killer. That was definitely the strongest aspects of his character, but that's where the weight of the script is. That's where he's given the most to do, is with that portrayal of Brandon. You don't really get to see a lot of the charismatic, likable Brandon at all in this film. Like, the most you get of it is like home movies in the opening credits. Matt Jones played the uncle, and he was there. He was fine. He played the role adequately enough. Meredith Hagner played Brandon's aunt, who also works as the school counselor. She was serviceable. Abraham Clinkscales plays a boy who bullies Brandon. He was his bully. I didn't really think that much of that performance, to be honest. The kids who played the bullies. One of them was named Fohawk, which I find pretty hilarious. I guess you also have... I would mention Gregory Allen Williams, who plays the sheriff. He was the other stand-up performer for me. Michael Rooker has a bit role in the mid-credits as this conspiracy theory blogger on the internet who's talking about all these other superpowered beings, setting things up for a sequel that will never happen. And Rainn Wilson, he actually has a little cameo as this character from Super in a photograph, and like a blink and you miss it moment. But it was pretty cool to see Super be referenced. I will say this, when it comes to a James Gunn superhero film, Super is a much better movie than Brightburn. The film also features some nice technical aspects. I mean, some good cinematography by Michael Della Torre. The editing was quite excellent and strong by Andrew S. Eisen. The score by Timothy Williams really didn't do anything for me. It was very generic and bland and forgettable, and it was their typical kind of score that's just very droning and very monotone, just one note. The epitome of a one-note score. The song by Billie Eilish, The Bad Guy, that they used in the end credits, that was more memorable and strong than anything in the movie. I think they could have used that in the film, instead of just during the end credits. I think they could have used that a little bit more in other scenes. Maybe they could have used some other contemporary songs or something, at least for the time, instead of this generic droning score that just goes nowhere. The film at least went by at a good pace. It's like 90 minutes. It's not 2 hours. I think because of how unfocused things are and how uneven the script is in terms of quality, if this was longer than it is, it would be something that I would say could honestly get a little insufferable. But as it is, it's watchable for the concept, for the ideas that are presented. The horror elements of this script really do shine. I would say those are the moments that definitely do bring the best visuals and definitely do bring the goods. It even had a surprising amount of practical stuff, although there was a lot of CGI at times. But what I mean by practical, like there was a lot of stuff that showcased the aftermath of Brandon's rampage, and you had some pretty grisly, gory practical effects, like that guy who got the bottom half of his face chopped in two. Like there's an aftermath shot of that, and it's all practical. The bottom half of his face is just hanging off, and there's blood spraying out. There's a shot that shows the mother of the love interest, which I didn't mention her. I should mention her when it comes to the performers. I don't know why I didn't mention her. Yeah, Emmie Hunter, who plays Caitlin Connor. Like, they mention her as the girl who's scared of Brandon, but really she's the girl that Brandon has a crush on. And Becky Wahlstrom played her mother, Erica. So the mother, Erica, is the one that gets the glass in the eye and then shows up dead in a barn, and she's all eviscerated and her stomach's ripped open. And that was all done practical as well. So it definitely does live up to its R rating, that's for sure. But there's some other moments where you could tell that they were working around the low budget, and Brandon will just show up and run into a guy, and he turns into CGI red mist. So that's something that was not the best. But it's just one of those things where it's a relatively low budget movie. Like, the rumor is it was like $6 million or at most $12 million. So kind of limited what you can do. So for what they had to work with, there were a nice amount of gory deaths and blood and visceralness that definitely did give the film somewhat of a punch. But at the end of the day, it's just there. It's just an mediocre, so-so superhero horror film that could have been really special. It could have been great. It could have been a classic of the genre. It really could have opened up a whole new door for horror films and for comic book films in general. But because the script was just so mediocre and just so uneven in terms of quality, that just was not meant to be. And it sucks. It does, because there was just so much potential with this film. So much potential with this concept. I mean, you could have really thrown in some subtext and aspects of society that could have been genuinely compelling in their own way. I mean, there's a lot that you could do here in terms of how somebody would view humanity if they only saw the worst of it, and they'd spent most of their life living a lie that's based around the best that we have to offer. But then once they are exposed to lies and just the worst aspects of humanity, that it turns them, that it twists them. It's something that really was laid out right in front of the writers, and they just didn't see it for whatever reason. And it was to the detriment of the film. and to anyone that decided to sit down and watch it. So I could see why it wasn't that well received at the time of its release. And I could see why there's a lot of people who are still on the fence about this movie. I could see why there's a lot of people who just feel the same way I do about it, where it's interesting. It's not a total train wreck. It's not a total disaster. I mean, the fact that it does try to do something different does give it more merit to me than your average generic slasher or your average generic comic book film. But at the same time, if you're not going to do the most that you possibly can with the concept, well, you're not really going to be that much better than a generic slasher or a generic comic book film. You're just going to be slightly better, but that's not enough to make you better in any legitimate capacity to the point where it's something that soars or flies considerably high above that kind of film. So, yeah, it's one of those films I'm conflicted on, but I'm still glad that I saw it because there were a lot of ideas here, although that they were not fully realized and they were not uh, ultimately handled the best. There were still a lot of ideas here that were interesting and intriguing, and I have always been a proponent of films that try to go to a place that's somewhat unique, somewhat different. Even if it does not work out for whatever reason, I still am a huge proponent of those kind of films. So it's one of those things where maybe you could just take this concept and you could retool it and you could do another film like this, but do it better. Because I think that there's still a lot of potential with this concept and with this kind of idea that has yet to be fully realized on film. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of Brightburn, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.